Hello friends, Anderson here. Today I would like to take a look at something again as part of the KTR Looks At series. And the thing we're specifically going to look at today is a follow-up to the first gander we had at the One Ring 2nd Edition RPG that was launched via Kickstarter and is published by Free League. And one of the final stretch goals of that Kickstarter, the one that made me actually buy into it, was the promise of a Strider mode, which, as the name implies, is sort of the rough, ragged ranger rule set that enables you to play the game solo, on your own, or cooperatively. And, well, this is a solo RPG channel, and I'm a solo RPG player, not exclusively, but for the most part. So that definitely pushed me over the edge to go and pledge the Kickstarter. The Strider mode is out now, and it was authored by the main author of Ironsworn and the co-author on Ironsworn Delve, Sean Tompkin and Matt Click together. And the idea there was to seamlessly integrate it into the rule system as is. So while it has some additional mechanics and little tweaks to the rules, it's basically you're playing the One Ring just as you would in a group game, but you are playing it without a Loremaster or Dungeon Master, whatever you want to call it. Now, before we take a look at the content of Strider mode, let me just offer a quick word of warning. This is not a play video, so I'm just going to walk through the rules. I will eventually play this, but Starforge just came out, there is Ironsworn to wrap up, there is Scarlet Heroes to do, and there is a bunch of other stuff, Disciples of Bone and Shadow, Zero Prep. The table is quite well laid at the moment, and it's more of an embarrassment of riches situation. So Strider mode will happen, but it's not going to happen tomorrow, at least not on this channel. And on that note, let me just quickly point you towards the Forge Rats podcast that I'm about to embark on the first episode of, which is a Star Forged actual play podcast that has its own dedicated channel you can find somewhere down here. And also like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. And now let's get to it. So, Strider mode, what is it actually? How does it look? I'm getting the dice out of the way and holding up the One Ring just so you can see it again. That's the book itself, the core rules, but Strider mode only exists as a digital format, and as far as I know at the moment only exists as a part of the Kickstarter award deliverables that are currently coming towards the backers. I have not been able to find it on DriveThruRPG. I'm not sure whether it's somehow clandestinely a part of the One Ring bundle if you buy it digitally or not. I assume at the moment it isn't, but hopefully there is a way to lay your hands on, because this is a very integral part of, well, just making the game more accessible for players who may not be able to find a group. And solo play is, well, while it's not just a substitute for not having a group, it's definitely a viable way to engage with this content. And especially in this case, because it's made by extremely competent people who have a very clear vision for what they want solo play to be. So, it is a digital format, but I couldn't help but print it out because I am more of a pen and paper in the truest paper sense kind of guy. Let's lift away the cover and take a look at the contents here. Starting us off with a general walk through the various basic philosophies behind solo play if you've never done it, and also immediately pointing us towards the engine that drives your imagination in solo play, which is tables. And there is also our first analogy to Ironsworn to some extent, because the tables fit into the general design philosophy of Ironsworn when it comes to how to use these oracles, these tables, to effectively generate prompts and content for you that string you along your steps into your adventures. The key tables here are the telling table, which is effectively your yes-no likelihood oracle, where you ask questions and get answers as you would a Dungeon Master or Lore Master. Then there's the lore table for a more complex set of questions, which is a combination of prompts similar to the action and theme or aspect and focus oracles in Ironsworn and Delve. These aren't the only tables in there. There's a whole host of others, more specific ones to walk you through interactions with your patron, which you will also have, same as in group play, and encounters on the road and specific good and bad turns of events and things that you can stumble across in your discoveries as you roam Middle-earth. So it is quite a comprehensive set of tools. Unsurprisingly, the flow of play in the solo mode is exactly the same as in the group mode, which is there is an adventuring phase and there is a fellowship phase. The adventuring phase being your scene-to-scene adventure, dungeon crawl / combat encounter travel kind of deal, and the fellowship phase being a more elaborate set of rules for your downtime, your recuperation time, but also your fleshing out your character time and interacting with your haven, with your spot of safety, with your home, as the whole One Ring game also evokes that Tolkien flavor of these spaces that your character is tied to, that also exists in Tolkien lore, like these hallowed names that you long to return to when you're up on a mountain pursued by orcs and wistfully think of, I just want to get back to Rivendell, something like that. There are some tweaks to the adventurer design. You do start off a little bit stronger than in group play, and I feel that is certainly an accurate reflection of the challenges that you have to overcome if you play on your own. And it also points towards the scope, I would say, of what feels the most natural for solo play in these rules as they are. I'm not saying this is the only way, it's just the one that it suggests to me is the most organic way to play, and that is to play rather a competent, veteran, already experienced character who, well, for whom it also makes sense to, on their own, step out into the wilds and roam and range around. So as the Strider term implies, to be some kind of ranger that is scouting out and around and trying to engage with the growing darkness on the terms of somebody who has a level of experience with this. That's not to say you cannot play your inexperienced hobbit adventurer who just sets out from the farm one day and gets into a chat with Bilbo and gets their first little quest, and then all of a sudden events unfold from there. It's just in the way the additional mechanics work, especially also the combat additions that we'll get to in a minute. A lot of this just shouts ranger or elven scout or hardened warrior from the pages. And this is also reflected then in your additional character creation resources you have to make your character stronger, because you do not have the backing of an entire group. You could probably alternatively also create and run yourself through a group play using these rules where you control multiple characters, but therein lies a little bit of a challenge because you do engage with the rules the way that they are written for group play, meaning you have to roll for not only your party's action, but the enemy actions. And if you control multiple enemies and multiple characters, that might create quite a bit of overhead to get through to get to the story. But if you're okay with that, there is nothing that stands against you there. So if you run yourself through a group of hobbits setting out from the Shire on a legendary adventure, maybe just don't take the additional resources, create multiple inexperienced adventurers and take it from there. But the way it's written, the way it seems to be intended, is that there is this veteran, hardened hero that has already seen a few things setting out and whose adventures we follow in the narrative. We start with a safe haven, we start with a fellowship score, since we also engage with the fellowship mechanics and everything that stems from them. And beyond that, the character creation happens just in line with everything that is laid out in the core rule book, so you'll need that for sure. Next session goes in a bit more detail on what is Strider mode, what is solo playing in a bit more of an elaborate fashion, giving you the rundown of what you can do with this, which is pretty much just about everything you can when you also play a group game. And then it already enters into some mechanical details. So it gives you your patron and requisite potential patron quests, which are also laid out in a set of tables. So you have Balin, you have Bilbo, Círdan, Gandalf, Gilrain and Tom Bombadil, and they each have a 6 option set of prompts that are relatively general, high level, for you to establish the general direction of a request if you do take on a quest from your patron. And when it comes to the actual details, there are additional tables that will help you flesh those out. Since I was already talking about Rangers specifically being quite well suited for this mode, let's have a look at the table of Gilrain, the Ranger head of state, so to speak. We've got your investigative quest to find a missing Ranger. We've got your investigation to find out what a powerful servant of the enemy is up to. We've got enemy patrols to engage with. We've got a specific location about to be contested by the Shadow, a threat of monstrous servants ramping up activities in the area, or an entire Ranger refuge going dark and worrying their counterparts, and they send somebody out to investigate. So that is the general level of detail that these prompts exist on, which means that taking it from there and rolling up a few more prompts through the other set of table will give you all the tools you need to come up with a reason why this Ranger refuge has gone dark, what happened to the Ranger that was missing, why are they drawn to a specific location to scope out and threaten with the forces of the Shadow, that kind of thing. Going over a way to handle your experience accumulation, it transitions into the systems, specifically action resolution, and how to set your difficulty number, your target number if you do not play with a Loremaster. And there you also already have your fortune tables for good and ill fortune results stemming from die rolls. So these are again relatively high level, non-specific prompts to think of a turn of events that can happen. So if you do roll a result and the dice tell you an enemy runs afoul of something that works towards them, it's up to you to extrapolate both from the situation in the fiction that you're currently working with, because the fiction generally always comes first, that fictional framing, and perhaps some additional oracles if you do not have an idea, to roll yourself up a prompt and then figure out, okay, well, maybe this orc patrol got caught in a flesh flood while crossing a river and its survivors are currently crawling ashore, but quite a few of them drowned. And then you can extrapolate from there, or was it some kind of water spirit that made them drown, or was it just unfortunate timing? You have a lot of connection point to always drive the story forward if you work with these prompts. They might seem a bit high level at first, but they never stand on their own. Context is always important, so if you run yourself through a game like this, the very first thing you do is establish the fictional starting point, then break it into the mechanical side to resolve any questions that you may have, but then immediately take it into the fiction again. So every time you do come up with an oracle prompt, you know exactly where you stand, what is currently happening to your character through the eyes of your character, and you can make those oracle prompts fit specifically to that situation. So having a number of results here from 1 to 6 or from 1 to 10 or from 1 to 20 or even from 1 to 100, you will get repeats, but you will also get the repeat in a completely different outset scenario. The context will be different, and that's what's important, the narrative context. We've got a few more mechanical management outlines here, how to deal with special success, how to use risk levels with requisite tables. And then we already get to the telling table, which is the Ask the Oracle odds table from Ironsworn, pretty much adapted into the Lord of the Rings One Ring system. What it effectively does is it asks you to assign a likelihood to the answer of the question you're pursuing. So let's say you come back from arranging and you are looking to hook up with your contact in Bree, but the contact is also a ranger, and the two of you have a history of missing each other. So will it be likely that they're also in town at the same time as you return, or will you have to wait a few days, or will you have to follow in their footsteps to locate them? Well, that's up to you to decide whether you want to make that a certain, likely, middling, doubtful, or unthinkable scenario, because that is basically then what you let the dice decide. So much like you would ask a Loremaster, is my ranger contact in town? and the Loremaster would weigh the options and go, well, they're also arranging, or hey, they're sitting at a table. You roll the dice and figure it out. Next up, you have your lore table for the more specific set of questions that generate prompts for you to work with then, again, extrapolating from the fictional situation. This one uses a system of 2 dice, the 6-sided and a 12-sided dice, to point you towards what table to roll on and what the result of the entry is. You have action, aspect, and focus, also using terminology that Ironsworn uses to guide you through your questions and what you do with the results, whether it's an action, aspect, or a focus you're after, or all 3 or 2 of them. That somewhat depends on the question. So going into the example here, you can answer the question of what is the nature of these woods? You just roll an aspect then, because you want to know whether they are deceptive or beautiful or dangerous or ancient. But if you want to clarify now what the mission with the missing ranger is, maybe it would be helpful to roll all 3 and condense the results into fleshing out your background information, why your ranger companion has gone missing. So if we randomly pick our way through here and we come up with a combination of, say, 8 deceptive defense, maybe that tells us that your ranger companion that had gone missing has fallen in with corrupted people who they thought they were helping, whose aid they were coming to in the defense against some outside threat, but in the end they were deceived and found their doom in that scenario. Maybe they're now imprisoned, or were handed over to the enemy, or were outright killed. But in the end you can establish a few touch points already at the very beginning that help you flesh out this 1 in 6 prompt rolling on the patron quest table that just points you towards, hey, our ranger has gone missing, I wonder what happened. This helps you to get a bit closer to the idea of what happened. Next up we have the Eye of Mordor, which plays quite a significant part as well, the attention of the enemy on your deeds as a heroic character in this world of Tolkien, where you have a very distinctly evil presence. This isn't particularly shades of grey, this is just, the Eye of Sauron is floating around, and if you're doing too much good, you might come into the crosshairs. And this is giving you mechanics on how to deal with this and how to figure out what happens. Are you being hunted? Do you have these revelations where you resolve a very distinct boiling point where this enemy attention just manifests? And again, you have a table and it gives you a bunch of consequences for building up too much of that eye of the enemy mechanic. Next up we come to combat, the combat section, and there is one notable addition, because in the combat resolution of the core rules you have your stance choices in how you want to engage with the combat sequence. You can choose an open stance, an aggressive stance, a defensive stance, a ranged stance, and to reflect the nature of solo play and the here also again tie in with Strider and with ranging and with having a character that is a ranged combatant but can also fight with swords. You get your Skirmish stance, which gives you a set of tools to work with in combat to reflect your single character's abilities, and also gives you a combat action called Gain Ground to perform as a ranger in combat, to reflect this rapidly darting in and out, repositioning, trying to disengage, trying to get the upper hand and use the territory against the orcs. It's over Grishnak, I have the high ground, that sort of thing. And generally I think this will work very, very well in resolving a combat sequence and giving you the right balance of using your somewhat stronger character to engage with a set of enemy, but it's not going to make you immortal or overpowered. And in this sense, it also bolsters your abilities to just disengage from combat, because in playing this, you will also have to acknowledge that you will be too outnumbered in some situations, and that's okay. That's part of the narrative. So you'll have to do a lot of hitting and running and trying to use this skirmish stance and the gain ground mechanic to effectively control the combat situation and also control when you disengage, because running away in this style of play is very much part of the game. So if you are envisioning your heroic, I don't know, dwarf with a two-hander that just lays about and swings massively and takes off the heads of scores and scores of orcs and goblins, well, it's not impossible, but you may have to tweak it a little, because the skirmish stance mechanic is very much a sign for how this is feeling overall, that sense of you are playing a ranger, and that includes darting in and out, range attacking, picking your targets, picking your moments, running away. We also have mechanics for councils, which is also an integral part of the Tolkien lore and an integral part of gameplay here, where you formally make a stand in front of a debate floor audience and you have your mechanics to resolve this here. Same as journeys, if anything, this is part of the main DNA of the Lord of the Rings, the journey itself. And again, you have your set of tables for events on the road. It starts with the generic, with the more general high level, what kind of misfortune befalls you, and then it brings you into the event details to make it more clear on what happens, but also what positives come out of it. So whether you find a shortcut, whether you have a chance meeting, all that kind of thing, including of course a joyful sight, because it will always try to make you aware that you're in Middle-earth and there are so many wonders to see, and it invites you to picture those. As for the fellowship phase, there is also your set of rules on how to spiritually recover for your solo player hero, and it doesn't need a whole lot of rules for this because it just basically follows the rules as written. That is a theme here. It gets by with minimal additions to the rules. It uses the rules just as they are laid out. The only real addition or divergence I could find were how to handle your character creation, making yourself a bit stronger, and to have that skirmish stance that enables you to have a bit more control of combat encounters when you're outnumbered. But that, I think, is very much in the spirit of the rules as written, and might even work to integrate back into the rules as written to play a bit of a more high-powered campaign with more seasoned characters, or to use the skirmish stance to reflect a different style of combat engagement. So the additions fit well with the system, and they will even fit back into the system if you as a Loremaster want to integrate them into group play. Same for the tables. If you want to encourage your players to stray off the beaten path, or if you want to go more low prep for your sessions and challenge your creativity a bit on the fly in the moment, you don't have to over prepare for everything. You can also use these prompts and these roles and these tables to run a group game. So overall, this also works very well as an addition to just regular group play. The appendix consists of the tables that were already present, but it concludes with using other tables, and that is something that I can only encourage you to do, because there are some aspects that you might struggle with. For instance, deciding what an enemy does in a combat encounter, and there is, of course, the fiction to follow. So let's say you have an encounter with what you think is two orcs, and you start fighting them and things go a bit awry, and two orcs, it's likely, will engage you in direct combat, and you want to find out what interesting thing can happen if you botch a roll. You roll badly, you face a negative consequence. Well, the narrative leaves you all sort of options open. You can just do the thing where you decide, well, this one orc hits me particularly hard, or you can manifest it in the fiction some more and decide, oh, there were actually three of them, and there is one of them that is rather scrawny and fearful, and it's the butt of the jokes of the two others, and always the one being bullied, but in combat it's a sneaky one, it's a nasty one, and it's creeping up towards your ranger with a poison dagger and trying to get you from behind. This is not a result in any kind of table. This is not a combat explicit description that you will find anywhere. This is just something you can extrapolate by following basically the rule of cool to figure out what is interesting that could happen in combat next, what surprising turn can you dump on your character to reflect extremely negative result happening. Or you can bring in other tables, and therein you have Ironsworn as a pretty good resource, because while this is the print-on-demand version and you can get that from ttrpg, the base game is free and it contains a whole host of tables that integrate very well with this because it's the same author. And therein you have, for instance, combat actions as taken by enemies. You can roll up what combat action enemies supposedly taking next. You have major plot twists, you have mystic backlash, you have all sorts of things in there that you can, with no or minor tweaks, seamlessly integrate into this Strider mode. So even if this looks like, well, in my other solo RPGs that are fully fledged rule systems, which, you know, this is an addition to a fully fledged rule system, I have more tables, I have more things at my disposal. Well, you still have those. You can use the Old Skull's chaotic descriptor table to give yourself even more Oracle prompts. You can use Ironsworn, you can use Scarlet Heroes, whatever has tables that you feel like you cannot do without, they'll work with this, because the canon, the Tolkien canon, is an advantage here in that it is so established and so strong. For one, it'll probably infuse a lot of the other works that you are playing subconsciously already. It's just where a lot of the fantasy derivatives come from. And even if not, you immediately have an idea, you know how to make this work in Middle-earth, because it's such a strong image and set of imageries that adapting something else to work in Middle-earth is not going to be a huge challenge. So all in all, looking back at this, I feel this is a fantastic addition to the One Ring rule set, both for group and, of course, mainly for solo play or cooperative play. And I do want to play this ASAP. It's just at the moment it's a bit much. But if you have it, if you lay your hands on it somehow, I can only encourage you to give it a try, because it feels like this is the closest a game has gotten to reflecting what the Lord of the Rings is about thematically, spiritually. It just encapsulates that world building best. If you want to run yourself through Middle-earth, and if you don't have a group to play with, or even if you have a group to play with but just want to experience it on your own and tell a very different kind of story of a lone hero, then this is the thing, this is for you. So I hope you enjoyed that, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye for now.